Please, just dance with me. My ex is here," she whispered, her trembling hands clutching the lapels of a stranger's bespoke suit. She just wanted to hide her plus-size frame from the man who shattered her confidence. She didn't realize she had just grabbed Chicago's most ruthless syndicate boss. Sweat prickled beneath the heavy layers of emerald chiffon as Chloe backed away from the opulent double doors of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom. Tonight was supposed to be a triumph. As a senior auditor at Deloitte, she had worked 80-hour weeks for a year to earn her invitation to this elite charity gala. She had spent a small fortune on a custom gown that perfectly hugged her size 18 curves, a dress designed to make her feel like a queen rather than the punchline of a cruel joke. For the first time in months, she had looked in the mirror and felt genuinely beautiful, fully embracing her soft, thick thighs, her full hips, and the generous curve of her stomach. Then she saw him, Brad. He was standing by the towering champagne pyramid, swirling a glass of Dom Perignon, looking exactly as arrogant and polished as the day he packed his bags and walked out of their shared apartment. Worse, clinging to his arm was a woman who looked like she had just stepped off a runway, a razor-thin, sharp-angled blonde in a slinky silver slip dress that left nothing to the imagination. A wave of nausea crashed over Chloe. The ghost of Brad's parting words echoed loudly in her ears, drowning out the string quartet playing in the corner. "I just need someone who takes care of their body, Chloe. Someone who fits into my lifestyle. You're just too much to look at." Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. Brad's eyes were scanning the room. He was turning his head. In 3 seconds he would spot her standing alone by the ice sculpture, looking terrified, confirming every pathetic narrative he had spun about her since the breakup. She couldn't let him see her alone. She couldn't let him look at her with that familiar mixture of pity and disgust. Without thinking, driven purely by the adrenaline of sheer mortification, Chloe spun around and collided heavily with a solid wall of muscle. A startled gasp escaped her lips as large, impossibly strong hands gripped her waist to steady her. She tilted her head back, her apologies dying in her throat. The man standing before her was not a typical corporate accountant or a junior partner trying to schmooze. He radiated a dark, suffocating authority that immediately made the lavish ballroom feel significantly smaller. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp jawlines, a faint, intriguing scar slicing through his left eyebrow, and piercing steel-grey eyes that looked as though they could dissect a person's soul in a single glance. He was dressed in a midnight black Tom Ford tuxedo that draped flawlessly over his broad, imposing frame. A heavy platinum Patek Philippe watch peeked out from his pristine cuffs. He didn't look like he belonged at a charity gala. He looked like he owned the building, the city, and everyone in it. "Careful." His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down Chloe's spine. From the corner of her eye, she saw Brad stepping away from the champagne table, walking directly toward her side of the room. Time ran out. "Please." Chloe choked out her fingers, instinctively curling into the lapels of the stranger's expensive tuxedo. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Just dance with me. My ex is here." She closed her eyes fully, bracing herself for the rejection. She was a fat, frantic woman, grabbing a stranger who looked like old money and lethal power. She expected him to peel her hands off his jacket and walk away, leaving her exposed to Brad's mockery. Instead, the stranger's steel-grey eyes flicked over her head, scanning the crowd with a predator's precision, before snapping back down to her flushed face. A dark, unreadable emotion flickered in his gaze. He didn't look at her body with disdain or surprise. He looked at her with a heavy, scorching intensity that made her breath catch. "Which one is he?" The stranger asked, his tone completely devoid of judgment. "The one in the navy suit with the blonde in silver," Chloe whispered frantically, trying to make herself as small as possible against his chest. "Please, I just need him to think I've moved on." The corners of the stranger's mouth twitched upward into a dangerous smirk. "Done." Without another word, he slid his right hand around to the small of her back, his large palm spreading wide over the fabric of her dress, gripping her with a firm, possessive heat. With his left hand, he captured her trembling fingers, lifting them smoothly into the traditional stance of a waltz. He didn't pull her into a polite, socially acceptable embrace. He pulled her flush against his chest, eliminating the space between them, until she could feel the steady, calm rhythm of his heartbeat. He guided her onto the polished mahogany dance floor, right as the orchestra shifted into a sweeping, romantic melody. "Follow my lead," he murmured, his breath brushing against the sensitive skin of her ear. Chloe had never been a graceful dancer. Her body was soft and substantial, and she usually felt clumsy, trying to navigate formal steps. But this man moved with an apex predator's lethal grace. He commanded the space, effortlessly maneuvering her through the crowd. He didn't make her feel heavy. He made her feel entirely weightless. "Relax your shoulders, sweetheart," he commanded softly. "If you want him to think you've moved on, you need to look like the only place you want to be is in my arms." Chloe swallowed hard, forcing herself to look up into his striking face. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Yet the way he held her with absolute certainty and undeniable reverence ignited a spark of defiance inside her. She wasn't an ugly secret to be hidden away. She was a woman in a beautiful dress, dancing with the most captivating man in the room. She let out a long breath, finally letting her weight settle into his hold. "Better," he praised his thumb, tracing a slow, burning circles against her lower back. "I'm Declan, by the way. Declan Hayes." "Chloe," she replied, her voice breathy. "Well, Chloe," Declan mused, his eyes darkening as he stared at her lush pink lips. "Your ex is a spectacularly blind fool." For 3 glorious minutes, Chloe forgot about the ballroom, the rigid social hierarchy of her firm, and the lingering trauma of her past relationship. Declan's undivided attention was an intoxicating drug. He didn't glance around the room. He didn't check his watch. He kept his eyes locked solely on her, his gaze wandering appreciatively over the soft curve of her neck and the deep plunge of her neckline, entirely unbothered by her size. In fact, his grip seemed to tighten whenever she tried to pull back, silently demanding she occupy her space. Then the illusion shattered. "Well, well, if it isn't Chloe." The grating, condescending tone cut through the music like a rusted blade. Chloe froze, her stomach plummeting to the floor. Brad stood at the edge of the dance floor, smirking. The blonde was no longer on his arm, likely fetching him another drink. He looked Chloe up and down, his eyes performing that familiar, degrading scan that always made her feel utterly worthless. He lingered intentionally on her wide hips and thick arms, before his lips curled into a nasty sneer. "I see you finally found a dress that could fit all of you," Brad mocked loudly enough for a passing waiter to grimace. "Though I'm surprised you're out on the floor. Didn't you always say you hated dancing because you'd break a sweat after 30 seconds? Tears of pure humiliation pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. She tried to step back, to pull away from Declan and run toward the ladies' room, but Declan's arm was a band of unyielding iron around her waist. He didn't let her move a single inch. Slowly, deliberately, Declan pivoted, placing his broad body partially in front of Chloe, shielding her from Brad's toxic gaze. The relaxed, charming aura he had worn during their dance vanished, entirely replaced by an atmosphere so cold and menacing that the temperature in their immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Do we have a problem here?" Declan asked. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but it carried a lethal frequency that demanded immediate, terrified respect. Brad blinked, puffing out his chest as he finally took in the man standing with his ex-girlfriend. He noted the Tom Ford suit and the Patek Philippe, but his fragile ego wouldn't let him back down in public. "No problem, buddy." Brad sneered, though his voice wavered slightly under Declan's dead-eyed stare. "Just catching up with my ex, though I gotta say you're brave taking on a project like that. She requires a lot of heavy lifting." Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the floor of the Ritz-Carlton would open up and swallow her whole. Declan didn't shout. He didn't swing a fist. Instead, he released Chloe's hand, reached into the inner breast pocket of his tuxedo, and pulled out a slim gold money clip. He calmly peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He took one step toward Brad. "What's your name, boy?" Declan asked smoothly. "Brad," he replied defensively. "Bradford Jenkins, VP of Acquisitions at Vanguard Finance. Who the hell are you?" "Vanguard Finance," Declan repeated softly, almost to himself. He reached out and casually tucked the $100 bill into the breast pocket of Brad's navy suit. The movement was so smooth, so entirely disrespectful, that Brad was too stunned to react. "Listen to me very carefully, Bradford. You are going to turn around, find your coat, and walk out of the Ritz. You are never going to speak to this beautiful woman again. If you breathe in her direction, if you look at her on the street, if her name even accidentally slips past your pathetic teeth, I will make a single phone call to your CEO, Richard Helms. Then I will have my associates dismantle your entire life, starting with your shiny new position at Vanguard and ending with you bleeding out in an alley in the South Side." Brad's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent white. He opened his mouth to speak, to call the man's bluff, but he looked into Declan's eyes and saw absolute, unwavering truth. This wasn't a corporate threat. This was a promise of violence. I, Brad stammered, taking a desperate step backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive loafers. "Leave!" Declan commanded, the single syllable cracking like a whip. Brad turned and practically sprinted toward the coat check, abandoning his date and his dignity. Chloe stood paralyzed, her mind racing to process what had just happened. She stared at Declan as he turned back to her, the terrifying mask of a predator melting away instantly to reveal the gentle, protective man who had held her on the dance floor. "I apologize for the scene, sweetheart," Declan murmured, reaching up to gently brush a stray curl behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her cheek, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. "I detest bullies. Who are you?" Chloe breathed, her heart pounding a new, entirely different rhythm. "Just a man who enjoyed a dance." Declan smiled softly. He checked his watch. "Unfortunately, I have a pressing engagement I must attend to, but the streets are slick with rain tonight. I insist you take my car home." Before she could protest, he flagged down a passing concierge, pressed a heavy metal token into the worker's hand, and gave rapid instructions regarding a private town car parked in the VIP loading dock. Declan turned back to Chloe, taking her hand one last time. He bowed his head, pressing a warm, lingering kiss to her knuckles. "Keep wearing the green, Chloe," he whispered. "It was made for you." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the sea of elite socialites, like a phantom. It wasn't until the following Monday morning at the Deloitte office that Chloe's world completely shattered. She was sitting at her cubicle, a lukewarm cup of coffee in hand, trying to focus on a high-risk compliance audit for a new shell corporation the federal government was investigating. The company O'Connor Shipping was flagged for massive money laundering tied to organized crime. Chloe clicked open the primary FBI dossier attached to the file, skimming past the financial irregularities to look at the primary suspects. Her breath completely stopped in her lungs. There, staring back at her in a black and white surveillance photograph, was the devastatingly handsome face of the man from the Ritz-Carlton. The sharp jawline, the faint scar through the eyebrow, the steel-grey eyes that looked lethal even in print. She frantically read the bold text beneath the photograph. Subject Declan Hayes, status high priority. Target, affiliation, head of the Hayes Syndicate, undisputed boss of the Chicago Irish Mafia. Chloe dropped her coffee mug. It shattered against the office carpet, but she couldn't look away from the screen. She hadn't just danced with a wealthy stranger to make her ex jealous. She had unwittingly thrown herself into the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. And he knew exactly who she was. Panic clawed at Chloe's throat, thick and suffocating, as she stared at the high-resolution FBI surveillance photograph, glowing on her dual-monitor setup. Declan Hayes. The man who had held her with such reverence, the man who had terrified her emotionally abusive ex-boyfriend into submission with a mere whisper, was the undisputed kingpin of the Chicago underworld. Her hands trembled so violently she had to interlock her fingers and press them against her soft stomach to steady herself. The spilled coffee seeped into the grey carpet of the Deloitte office, but she could not bring herself to care. Her mind raced back to the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, analyzing every second of their interaction. Had it been a coincidence, a random act of kindness from a ruthless killer, or was she a senior auditor handling the most sensitive financial investigation in the city, merely a pawn in a much larger, darker game? "Chloe, I need those O'Connor Shipping projections on my desk by noon," a sharp voice barked, shattering her spiraling thoughts. Harrison Wright, the senior managing partner at Deloitte, strode past her cubicle entirely oblivious to the shattered ceramic mug and her pale, terrified complexion. "The Department of Justice wants a preliminary briefing tomorrow morning. We think they are moving the laundered funds through a domestic shell corporation this week. Find the domestic link." Chloe swallowed hard, minimizing the FBI dossier with a frantic, desperate click of her mouse. "Right away, Harrison." She managed to squeak out her voice, sounding incredibly foreign and thin to her own ears. As her boss disappeared down the fluorescent-lit corridor, Chloe pulled up the dense, convoluted spreadsheets. For 6 grueling months, she had been chasing ghost transactions, trying to map exactly where hundreds of millions of dollars were vanishing off the grid. Now, looking at the encrypted data with the terrifying knowledge of who was actually behind the curtain, the numbers began to tell a drastically different story. She dug into the offshore routing numbers, bypassing the standard protocols, utilizing a backdoor algorithm she had coded herself during late nights in the office. Hours bled into the afternoon. The office slowly emptied out around her, the hum of chatter fading into the hollow silence of a corporate building after dark. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, Chloe found the anomaly. It was buried beneath 3 layers of dummy corporations based in the Cayman Islands, but the routing sequence was undeniable. The O'Connor shipping funds were not just being laundered, they were being systematically siphoned off. Someone was stealing from the Hayes Syndicate, and the domestic account receiving the stolen millions belonged to Vanguard Finance, specifically the private client portfolio managed by Bradford Jenkins. The air vanished from Chloe's lungs. Brad, her vicious, cruel ex-boyfriend, who mocked her weight and shattered her self-esteem, was secretly embezzling from the Irish Mafia. A sickening realization hit her like a physical blow. Brad had aggressively encouraged her to take the O'Connor audit promotion. He had celebrated when she got the assignment. He hadn't been proud of her. He had planted her at the center of a federal investigation, intending to use her digital signature as a scapegoat when the missing funds were finally noticed by the syndicate. If the Mafia came looking for their stolen money, all the digital footprints would lead directly to Chloe's terminal at Deloitte. She shoved her laptop into her leather tote bag, her heart hammering against her ribs with brutal force. She needed to go to the FBI. She needed to wipe her server access. She needed to disappear. The underground parking garage beneath Wacker Drive was a damp, echoing cavern of concrete and flickering fluorescent lights. The torrential rain outside had leaked through the foundational cracks, leaving slick puddles of oily water across the pavement. Chloe's heels clicked rapidly as she practically jogged toward her reliable sedan, her fingers digging deeply into her coat pockets to clutch her keys. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, playing wicked tricks on her already frayed nerves. "Going somewhere in a hurry, sweetheart." The voice did not belong to Declan. It was rough, heavily accented, and dripping with malicious intent. Chloe froze her breath, turning to visible mist in the chilly garage air. Two men stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking her path to her vehicle. They were massive, their faces obscured by dark ski masks, but the heavy, lethal bulk of suppressed firearms in their hands required no translation. These were not corporate security guards. These were Volkov-Bratva enforcers, the rival Russian syndicate, heavily documented in the Deloitte files as direct enemies of the Hayes family. "Give us the laptop bag, corporate," the taller man demanded, raising the barrel of his weapon to point directly at her chest. "We know what you found. Hand over the Vanguard files and we might just shoot you somewhere non-lethal." Chloe's knees threatened to buckle under the sheer weight of her terror. She clutched the heavy leather tote against her generous curves, treating the laptop like a physical shield. I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her voice shaking violently. "Wrong answer," the second thug sneered, racking the slide of his pistol with a terrifying metallic clack. Before the man could take another step, the harsh screech of tires echoed through the subterranean garage. A sleek, armored black SUV materialized from the lower-level ramp, accelerating at a breakneck homicidal speed. The vehicle slammed aggressively into the concrete pillar right beside the attackers, sending a shower of sparks and pulverized rock into the air. The rear door flew open before the SUV even fully stopped. Declan Hayes emerged from the shadows like an avenging demon. He wasn't wearing a Tom Ford tuxedo tonight. He wore a tailored black overcoat, leather gloves, and an expression of pure, unadulterated violence. The steel-grey eyes that had gazed at her with such warm appreciation at the gala were now hollow, glacial, and utterly merciless. Without hesitation, Declan raised a sleek, matte black handgun. Two silenced shots coughed through the damp garage air. Both Russian enforcers dropped to the oily pavement, instantly neutralized before they could even pivot to face the new threat. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the steady drum of rain leaking through the ceiling, and Chloe's own ragged, terrified gasps. Declan holstered his weapon smoothly, stepping over the fallen men without a second glance. He walked directly toward Chloe, his imposing frame commanding the dreary space. He stopped inches away from her, scanning her trembling body from head to toe, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his gravelly voice tight with a terrifyingly dark edge. Chloe couldn't speak. She just shook her head, tears of delayed shock finally spilling hotly over her cheeks. Declan let out a heavy breath, reaching out with a gloved hand to gently cup her jaw. His thumb wiped away a tear, the gesture so startlingly tender compared to the brutal execution she had just witnessed. "I told you to be careful, Chloe. Get in the car. Now." The penthouse suite atop the St. Regis Chicago was a testament to untouchable wealth and absolute power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panoramic view of the storm raging across Lake Michigan, while the interior was a masterclass in dark marble plush velvet and roaring fireplaces. Chloe sat rigidly on the edge of a massive circular leather sofa, clutching a tumbler of 20-year-old Macallan Scotch that Declan had pressed into her trembling hands upon arrival. Declan stood by the towering glass window, shrugging off his heavy overcoat. He rolled up the sleeves of his black dress shirt, revealing forearms heavily inked with intricate Celtic tattoos and a myriad of faded scars. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, tossing it back in a single fluid motion before turning to face her. The lethal edge from the parking garage had slightly softened, but the dangerous, predatory aura remained fully intact. "You've been crying for 20 minutes, Declan observed quietly, crossing the sprawling room to sit beside her. He didn't crowd her, but his proximity alone was overwhelming. "Drink the scotch, Chloe. It will steady your nerves." Chloe took a small burning sip, coughing slightly as the amber liquid scorched a path down her throat. You killed them," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "They were going to put a bullet in your chest to acquire the financial ledgers you are currently holding in your lap." Declan replied, his tone chillingly pragmatic. "I merely accelerated their demise. Now tell me what you found on the Deloitte servers." Chloe snapped her head, up her eyes wide with betrayal. "You knew. At the Ritz. You knew exactly who I was before I even crashed into you. You didn't dance with me to save me from Brad. You were targeting me." Declan's jaw clenched tightly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his piercing gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. "Half-truth," he admitted softly. "I attended the charity gala because I needed to put a face to the brilliant senior auditor who was dismantling my offshore logistics network. I intended to observe you from a distance, to gauge whether you were a corporate drone or a legitimate threat." And Chloe challenged, finding a sudden, unexpected flare of courage buried beneath her fear. "And then you crashed into my chest wearing that magnificent green dress, looking like absolute perfection." Declan confessed, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a dark, heavy possessiveness. "You grabbed my lapels, begging for a dance. The moment I put my hands on your waist, the moment I felt how soft and perfect you were against me, the audit ceased to matter. The business ceased to matter. All I wanted was to keep my hands on you." Chloe's heart stuttered, a flush of heat creeping up her neck. For years she had been told by society, and specifically by Brad, that her plus-size body was a flaw to be minimized, a problem to be fixed. Yet here was a billionaire crime boss, a man who could command any supermodel in the city, looking at her wide hips and thick thighs as if she were a goddess descended from Olympus. "But you know what Brad did," Chloe said, bringing the conversation forcefully back to the terrifying reality. She opened her laptop bag, pulling out the printed ledgers. "He didn't just dump me. He set me up. He's been embezzling your money through Vanguard Finance and coding it to look like my audit tracks. If the Russians didn't kill me tonight, your people eventually would have." Declan took the papers from her shaking hands. He didn't even look at the numbers. He tossed the incredibly valuable documents carelessly onto the glass coffee table. "I already knew Bradford was stealing from me," Declan stated coldly. "My tech division flagged the Vanguard discrepancy a month ago. I allowed the embezzlement to continue solely to track his network and see who he was working with. What I did not know until my men intercepted the Volkov transmission tonight was that he intended to use you as the sacrificial lamb." A dark, terrifying shadow crossed Declan's handsome face, transforming his features into something entirely demonic. "Bradford Jenkins made a catastrophic error. He thought he could steal my money. That was a business dispute. But putting a target on your back, putting you in the crosshairs of the Volkov Bratva." Declan's voice was a lethal whisper. That was a death sentence. Chloe shivered, but to her absolute shock, she didn't feel afraid of Declan. The violence in his eyes wasn't directed at her. It was an impenetrable shield raised to protect her. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Someone saw her inherent worth and was willing to burn the city to the ground to keep her safe. "What happens now?" Chloe asked, her voice steadying as she looked directly into his steel-grey eyes. Declan reached out his large, warm hands, gently gripping her thick, soft thighs, pulling her slightly closer until her knees rested against his. The touch was possessive grounding and undeniably electric. "Tomorrow morning you are going to walk into Deloitte and tender your resignation," Declan commanded, softly, his thumbs tracing slow, intoxicating circles over the fabric of her skirt. "You will hand over the cleansed version of the O'Connor file to Harrison Wright, securely closing the federal investigation. You are going to leave the corporate world behind." "And Brad?" Chloe asked, a dark, vindictive thrill shooting through her veins. Declan's lips curved into a wicked, breathtaking smirk. "Leave Bradford to me. By midnight tomorrow, Vanguard Finance will cease to exist, and your ex-boyfriend will understand the true definition of heavy lifting in a federal penitentiary, assuming he survives the weekend." Declan shifted closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her sweet vanilla scent. "You are done being a pawn, Chloe. You are done hiding your beautiful body from a world that doesn't deserve to look at it. From this night forward, you belong to me. You are under my protection. You are the queen of the Hayes Syndicate, and anyone who disrespects you will answer directly to my wrath." Chloe closed her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering breath as Declan's lips pressed a scorching trail of kisses along her collarbone. She had spent her entire life trying to shrink, trying to fit into a mold that was never built for her. In the arms of the Mafia boss, surrounded by darkness and danger, she had finally found the one place where she was allowed to be absolutely, unapologetically massive. She tangled her fingers into Declan's thick, dark hair, pulling him closer, fully embracing the beautiful, terrifying monster who had finally taught her how to dance in the dark. Did Chloe's journey from a heartbroken auditor to the fierce, untouchable queen of the Hayes Syndicate leave you absolutely speechless? If you loved watching Declan burn the world down just to protect the woman he loves, smash that like button right now. Share this thrilling mafia romance with your friends who crave intense drama and epic plot twists. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more explosive, heart-pounding audio stories. Your next obsession is just one click away.